Here's a question almost nobody asks about one of the strangest success stories in the Bible. How does a wall that lay in ruins for nearly a century and a half get rebuilt in just 52 days, while the people building it are being threatened, mocked, and hunted the entire time? That's not a motivational number. It's in the text in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15. And the man who did it wasn't a soldier. He wasn't an architect. He poured wine for a foreign king, hundreds of miles away in the Persian city of Susa. Yet what he left behind reads less like ancient history and more like a field manual, a first-hand account of the decisions he made under pressure, written in his own hand. By the end of this video, you'll understand the code Nehemiah followed, the specific, repeatable moves that turned an impossible ruin into 52 days of unstoppable work under constant attack. And I'll be honest with you, the last move is the one almost everyone gets wrong. To understand the code, you have to understand the problem, because the problem wasn't the wall. Think about it. Jerusalem's wall had been broken down since the Babylonians burned the city in 586 BC. By the time Nehemiah shows up, roughly 140 years have passed. 4, maybe 5 generations. People had been born, grown old, and died in a city with no wall. And in the ancient world, a city with no wall wasn't really a city. It was an open target. Anyone could walk in. Anyone could take what they wanted. So here's the real question, the one the book of Nehemiah quietly forces on you. If everyone knew the wall was down and everyone knew it left them exposed, why did it sit in rubble for 140 years? The answer is uncomfortable, because it's the same answer for most of the things that stay broken in our own lives. It wasn't a lack of resources. The materials were there. Stone doesn't disappear. It wasn't a lack of people. Jerusalem had residents, families, tradesmen, and it wasn't that nobody cared. They cared enough to be ashamed. When Nehemiah first hears the report about the city, back in chapter 1, the messenger describes the people as living in great trouble and shame. They felt the weight of it every single day. They had the stone, they had the hands, they had the pain, and still nothing moved. If you've ever stood in front of something in your own life that everybody agrees needs fixing, a debt, a relationship, a habit, a project at work that's been stalled for years, you already know this feeling. It's not that you don't want it fixed. It's that the thing feels too big, the opposition feels too real, and somewhere along the way, someday, quietly became never. That's the ruin Nehemiah walked into. Not just broken stone, broken belief. A whole population that had made peace with the rubble because trying and failing felt worse than never trying at all. And here's the first move in his code, the one that sets up everything else. Before Nehemiah lifts a single stone, before he recruits a single worker, he does something that looks like the opposite of action. He waits, and he grieves. Chapter 1 tells us that when he heard the report, he sat down and wept and mourned for days. Then he fasted and prayed, not for an afternoon, but for months. The timeline in the text is striking. He hears the news in the month of Chislev, roughly our December, and he doesn't speak to the king until Nisan, around April. That's about 4 months of carrying this before he makes a single request. Now, to a man like you, someone who gets things done, who's wired to move. That can sound like wasted time. 4 months? Just praying? But watch what that season actually did. It turned a distant problem into a personal mission. It clarified exactly what he was going to ask for before he ever opened his mouth. And it meant that when the moment came, he wasn't reacting. He was ready. That's the first line of the code, and I want you to sit with it, because it cuts against everything our culture tells us. The people who finish the impossible things usually start slower than everyone else. They let the weight of the problem do its work in them first. They don't move until the vision is clear enough to survive the opposition they know is coming. And opposition was coming. The moment Nehemiah finally acts, the moment word gets out that someone is actually going to rebuild this wall, 3 names appear in the story. 3 men who will spend the next 52 days trying to stop him by every means they can invent. Because that's the thing nobody warns you about. The rubble sits quietly for 140 years. But the moment you decide to rebuild, that's the moment the attacks begin. The moment the work began, 3 men stepped out of the shadows. Remember their names because Nehemiah did. He wrote them down. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem. These weren't random troublemakers. They were regional power players. Sanballat governed Samaria to the north. Tobiah held authority over Ammon to the east. Geshem was a chief among the Arab tribes to the south. Look at a map and you'll see it. Jerusalem was surrounded, north, east, and south, by men who had built their entire careers on Jerusalem staying weak. A rebuilt wall didn't just threaten their pride, it threatened their power. And here's the second move in Nehemiah's code, the part most people miss. He understood something we forget when we start something hard. Opposition is not a sign you're on the wrong path. Very often, it's the first confirmation you're on the right one. Think about your own life for a second. The debt sat there quietly for years until the month you finally made a plan to pay it down, and suddenly the car broke and the bill came due. The strained relationship coasted along until the day you decided to actually repair it, and the old resentment came roaring back. That's not bad luck. That's the pattern. The rubble is silent. The rebuilding is what draws fire. So how did the enemies attack? Watch this, because it's a masterclass in every form of pressure you'll ever face. And it comes in stages, escalating each time Nehemiah refuses to break. Stage 1 was mockery. Sanballat stood in front of the army of Samaria and ridiculed them out loud. "What are these feeble Jews doing?" he sneered. "Can they bring burnt stones back to life from heaps of rubbish?" Tobiah added his own line, the kind of cruelty that is designed to sound like a joke. Even if a fox climbed on that wall, he laughed, it would collapse under its weight. Now think about the timing. This was the very beginning, when the wall was lowest, weakest, easiest to doubt. That's not an accident. Contempt always shows up earliest when the thing you're building is at its most fragile and you have the least proof it'll work. The enemy of any good work knows the cheapest moment to stop you is before you've built anything worth defending. And here's what Nehemiah did with the mockery, the third move in his code. He didn't argue. He didn't fire back. He didn't launch a campaign to defend his reputation. He took it straight to God in a short, honest prayer. And then This is the line I want you to hold on to. He simply kept building. The text says, and I'm giving you the plain sense of Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 6. They built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, because the people had a mind to work. Half its height. Sit with that image. The mockery was still ringing in their ears, the enemies were still circling, and the wall was already halfway up. They didn't answer the insults with speeches. They answered them with stone. That's a move you can make this week. When someone tells you your plan is foolish, the diet won't last, the business won't work, the marriage can't be saved, you don't owe them a debate. You owe your work your hands. Nehemiah understood that the most powerful response to "you can't" is a wall that's visibly, undeniably rising. But mockery was only stage one. When contempt failed, when Sanballat saw the gaps closing and the wall climbing anyway, the strategy changed. The enemies stopped laughing and started conspiring. Nehemiah chapter 4 tells us they banded together, all of them, to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw the work into confusion. The war of words became a threat of actual violence. And this is where the code gets sharper, where Nehemiah has to answer a question every one of us eventually faces when we're building something under attack. Do you stop and defend? Or do you find a way to do both, to guard and to build at the same time? Because the next move he made is the one that turned a vulnerable crew of amateurs into something almost impossible to stop. And it's the move most of us get completely backwards. Here's the mistake almost all of us make when the threats get real. We stop building to deal with the threat. The project goes on hold while we manage the crisis. And the tragedy is that the crisis often wins, not by defeating us, but simply by keeping us from ever finishing. Nehemiah refused that trade, and his solution is the single most famous image in the entire book, the fourth move in his code, and the one that gave rise to a phrase people still use today: the sword and the trowel. When the plot to attack became real, Nehemiah did not send the builders home. He did not pause the work to raise an army. He reorganized. Half the men stood guard, armed and watching, while the other half kept building, and then they rotated. He stationed families by clans at the lowest, most exposed points of the wall, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And the builders themselves? Nehemiah tells us that those who carried materials worked with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Every man who built kept his sword strapped to his side. He even kept a trumpeter beside him, so that if an attack came at any point along that sprawling wall, one blast could call everyone to that spot. Read what he told them and hear the steadiness in it. This is Nehemiah chapter 4. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. And then, in the same breath, our God will fight for us. He didn't say God will fight instead of us. He said God will fight for us while we keep our tools in our hands and our weapons at our sides. That's the balance most of us lose. We swing to one extreme or the other. Some of us are all trowel. We put our heads down and build and pretend the threat isn't there until it knocks the whole thing over. Others are all sword. We get so consumed with fighting the opposition, defending ourselves, answering every critic, that we never lay another stone. Nehemiah's code says, carry both. Stay alert to the real danger. And do not stop building for a single day. Bring that into your own week. Say you're trying to climb out of a financial hole. And I want to be clear here, this is ancient wisdom, not financial advice, and never a promise that your circumstances will change on any timeline. But the principle holds. There's the guarding, cutting the expense, canceling the subscription, saying no to the thing that keeps the leak open. And there's the building, the extra income, the plan, the discipline that slowly raises the wall. Most people do one or the other. They defend without building, or they build without defending, and the hole never closes. Nehemiah would tell you to do both at the same time, every single day, with a weapon in one hand and a stone in the other. But the enemies weren't done. Because when the threat of force didn't work either, when the wall kept rising with armed men standing over it, Sanballat and Geshem changed tactics one more time. And this final assault was the most dangerous of all, precisely because it didn't look like an attack. It looked like an invitation. They sent Nehemiah a friendly message. Come, let's meet together. Out in the plain of Ono, one of the villages a good day's journey away. Let's talk. Let's find some common ground. It sounded reasonable. It sounded almost gracious. But Nehemiah saw straight through it. He knew that leaving the wall, stepping away from the work, out to a remote meeting with men who wanted him dead, was the trap. And his reply is one of the most quietly powerful sentences a person under pressure has ever spoken. I'm giving you the plain sense of Nehemiah chapter 6. I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it to come to you? 4 times they sent the invitation. 4 times he sent back the same answer. I am doing a great work. I cannot come down. And that line, that refusal to be pulled off the wall by a reasonable-sounding distraction, points us straight to the final move in Nehemiah's code. The one I told you at the start that almost everyone gets wrong. Because the last enemy Nehemiah faced wasn't Sanballat or Tobiah or Geshem at all. It was much closer than that. The last enemy Nehemiah faced didn't carry a sword. He carried a warning. His name was Shemaiah, and unlike Sanballat and the others, Shemaiah wasn't outside the city hurling insults. He was inside. He appeared to be one of them, a man with religious language on his lips, someone Nehemiah likely knew. Shemaiah shut himself up in his house, called Nehemiah to him, and delivered a message dressed in fear. They're coming to kill you tonight. Let's hide together in the temple, behind locked doors, where you'll be safe. Listen to how reasonable that sounds. It's not mockery. It's not a threat. It's concern. It's a friend, apparently, offering you a way out when you're exhausted and the danger feels real. And Nehemiah was tired. He'd been mocked, threatened, and lured for weeks. This was the moment his guard was lowest, which is exactly why this attack came last. But Nehemiah saw it. Here's the plain sense of what he says in Nehemiah chapter 6. Should a man like me run away? And should someone like me go into the temple just to save his life? I will not go in, because Nehemiah wasn't a priest, and only priests could enter that part of the temple. If he'd taken the bait, if fear had driven him behind those doors, he would have broken God's law in full view of everyone. His enemies didn't need to kill him. They just needed him to be afraid enough to discredit himself. And then Nehemiah writes the line that unlocks the whole code. I realized God had not sent him. Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He was hired so that I would be afraid and act on that fear and sin. There it is, the final move. The last enemy was never really Sanballat, or the sword, or even the lie. It was fear, and the temptation to let fear make you act out of character, to run, to hide, to abandon your post, to do the one thing that undoes everything you've built. This is the move most of us get wrong. We survive the mockery. We stand up to the open threats. And then, when we're worn down and someone offers us a reasonable-sounding way to step off the wall, a shortcut, a compromise, a hiding place, we take it. And that quiet, sensible retreat costs us what all the loud attacks never could. Nehemiah's code, from first move to last, was really one thing. He refused to come down off the wall, not for contempt, not for threats, not for a friendly invitation, not even for fear wearing the face of concern. And if this is stirring something in you, if you're building something under pressure and you needed to hear that the opposition isn't proof you're wrong, then subscribe. There's fresh manna here every single day, and this is exactly the kind of thing we sit with together. And if you've made it this far, you're not a casual viewer, you're a builder. Tell me below what wall you're rebuilding right now, because here's how the story ends. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15, the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month Elul, in 52 days, a ruin that had stood for nearly a century and a half, rebuilt in under 2 months, by perfume makers and priests and merchants who had never laid stone before, under constant attack from the outside and the inside, from the first day to the last. And the very next verse tells us what happened when the surrounding nations heard of it. They were afraid, and their confidence collapsed, because they realized this work had been done with the help of God. That's the quiet center of the whole code. Nehemiah planned like everything depended on him. The guards, the swords, the rotations, the refusals. And he prayed like everything depended on God. He never once split those two apart. The wall you're standing in front of has probably been rubble a long time. And the moment you decide to rebuild it, the voices will come, some mocking, some threatening, and the most dangerous one of all sounding a lot like a friend, telling you it's safer to come down. Don't come down. Keep the trowel in one hand, the sword in the other, and build. Scripture explained, faith applied, life changed. This was your daily manna. Come hungry tomorrow.